Welcome to Music Collaboration Online live stream. We are broadcasting to you from Australia, and this is a channel where we are trying to popularize music collaboration technologies and various strategies that enable musicians located remotely to collaborate with each other. Today, we have a very special guest joining us from across the oceans and joining us across different time zones. Um, Today, we have Jesse Chappell from SonoBus joining us. So, hello, Jesse.
Hello, Martin.
So Jesse is a software developer specializing in music and audio applications who plays variety of instruments, as we can see looking at your studio setup just behind you.
Yeah, it's a bunch
And
of junk back there. Yeah.
and I know that you are obviously a developer of an application called SonoBus, which we will discuss in a lot of detail today. But what is also quite exciting about your work is that you have also developed some amazing music apps for the iOS platform. So ThumbJam, DrumJam, TonalEnergy Tuner, and others. So you have a great history of developing some unique software for musicians. And SonoBus is the latest in your catalog of unique products. So I just would like to perhaps start and with your background and your history. So could you tell us how did you get into um, being a developer of music applications?
Sure. I mean, I guess it has to start, as a kid, always interested in computers. Back when they were not very good. But yeah, and at the same time, also a musician. My dad's a musician, so I grew up having a lot of instruments around the house. Um, I played bass, like electric bass, primarily in high school and college and beyond. But in bands. So I always had the music thing going on, and then went to school for computer science. Came out, got a regular job doing software development, mostly signal processing related stuff. Um, and then that went on as normal, but on the side is kind of when I started to work on software relating to music, just not part of the day job, just for fun. And actually, open source was a sort of an early part of my journey. Um, Back in the early 2000s, I worked on a product called, well, piece of software called SooperLooper, which is like a live looping sampler thing, and that was for Linux and Mac mostly. And at the same time, around the same time, I also got involved as a contributor to Ardor, the open source
For Linux?
for Linux primarily.
Yep,
Yeah, it
yep.
kind of branched out, but yeah, it was mostly Linux at that time.
So that's another important piece of software. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I didn't stick with that one. It's sort of my life drifted in a different direction, but that was really valuable in terms of getting experience doing audio apps, which is kind of it's a whole there's a whole lot of different things you have to be concerned about when you're doing real-time audio apps. So that was you know it was a good start. And then yeah, to sort of follow on there, the when the iPhone came out, um, the first iPhone that was decent for apps, which is like the 3GS, I guess. No, the 3G. Yeah, yeah. I have one sitting over here. It hasn't been turned on in about 10 years. I don't think it can turn on anymore. Um, yeah, I thought that it would be a good platform for making audio apps, and there were a couple at the time um, that I remember. But so I worked on that probably for about a year or two before ThumbJam, what turned into ThumbJam, was released. Um, and because it was so early in the iOS app world, really, especially for music apps, ended up doing fairly well at that time. Um, and sort of after a year or two of that being available, I decided that it might be possible for me to quit my regular day job and just try this music app thing. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, so it kind of went from there. I then hooked up with Pete Lockett to work on DrumJam, and then a band director from Texas contacted me wanting to do sort of a tuner and metronome app that was more geared towards high school, college band kind of solutions. That was a little bit more detailed and more sort of specific. And so that turned into TonalEnergy Tuner. Um, and so that those sort of three apps sort of have been the mainstay of what I've been doing in the iOS world and Android as well. The tuner, since the students are one of the main users of that one, had to get an Android version as well.
Which is very, very another interesting aspect of your work, because I know there is a lot less on offer for Android users when it comes to high quality, music making or audio applications in general. So
Yeah,
again,
they,
you
I mean,
broke
they've
this
had
new
trouble from
ground.
the beginning in terms of low latency. It really wasn't available until these last few years. Sometimes, it's it's still kind of a work in progress for Android. Whereas iOS got it from the very beginning. From 2008, 2009, they had it. There was never any problems with low latency, anything, and they just did it right. And Android did it wrong. So it's yeah. So it hasn't been fun in that sense, but
But
we'll
you
get into it
persevere.
later. With regards to the SonoBus issues on these mobile platforms, we'll talk about it a little later. But um, yeah, and so that's kind of my compressed history there. Um,
Yeah.
and then up until recently, I don't know if you want to ask questions or I'll just keep talking with
I
this
might
stuff.
eventually ask, but yeah, keep on. Actually, before we continue, I can see that people are tuning in on YouTube and Facebook, and I got a comment on YouTube that your
Well,
mic is lower
I can talk closer to the mic.
in comparison to mine. I reduced the gain on my mic, but I don't know if there is any
Yeah, I
more
can do
gain.
something
Yeah.
about that.
Oh, okay, cool. So maybe it will be equally loud. Thanks, Jonathan, for the comment. That's always good to know how it sounds like
Okay,
at the
how
other
about
end.
this?
Yeah, that sounds
Is
loud
this
to
is
me.
this hotter for you?
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's I think that's good. Yeah. So going back to what you were saying, that was your main work, developing iOS music apps and eventually Android as well. Um, and that was pretty much up until last year, when obviously COVID has changed the world. And then I understand the idea for SonoBus has emerged.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess last summer is when I started working on SonoBus. I had looked into some of the other solutions, some of the other things that were doing this, like Jack Trip, um, Jamulus, I guess Jamkazam. There was a bunch, and there was something kind. I felt like there was a hole in there was a missing zone where the thing was really quick for a user to just set up and start using, but also um, showed a lot of details and were actually able to let you change a lot of the settings. Um, the specific type of data, whether it's uncompressed or compressed, what is the bit rate, um, various options with the jitter buffers, all that stuff I wanted to be able to see and change easily. Mostly for, I mean, not only just for being able to use it, but actually being able to develop it and say, okay, what is working, what isn't, but then afterwards still having it be useful. And then at the same time, I also wanted one that was that could be a plugin that you could load up into a DAW and use, if you wanted to connect to you know studios, multi-channel thing, something a little bit more, um, I don't want to say professional, but it has some more capabilities that some of the other ones didn't have, that were more focused just on jamming. um, so I kind of wanted to be a catch-all that could do all this stuff. And then, while we're at it, I'll throw in iOS and Android support. That wasn't the primary goal, but because I did it using this cross-platform toolkit called Juice, all C++, um, they actually made it really easy to both do it as a plugin and a standalone version, just using the same code pretty much exactly, um, as well as doing an Android and iOS version. Um,
So you're covering Mac OS, Windows, Android, iOS, and Linux as well?
and Linux, yeah,
Yep.
yeah, which you can, yeah, we actually have some Linux builds, some Debian packages you can use, and some other various things. Once you sort of go into the Linux world, people are like, I want this other format. I want this other format. So it's like, okay, I'll do it. Or you can build it from source. So yeah. And the other thing is it's open source,
Mhm.
which some of them obviously Jacktrip and Jamulus are. Um, and so also this is using peer-to-peer. So right now, currently it is peer-to-peer only. So um, everyone's sending their own audio and receiving their own audio from everyone else at the same time. There's no server involved, which is, it kind of sets it apart from the Jamulus model. And so in theory, with the right network setup, you could get a lower latency, because it's not going through a server to get to someone else. It's going directly to someone else. In practice, it's not always the case that it's going to be lower latency, just in terms of the way networks um, are designed and are. Um, but that was the sort of the basis I started with. And also with SonoBus, I was looking for. I didn't build it from nothing. I actually I use quite heavily this another library called AOO, or Audio over OSC, um, by Christoph Resi from Austria, I believe. Um, and so he had come out with this thing probably, I don't know, in the spring or earlier last year, and I'd found it. It was actually kind of hard to find. It was not being officially, he hadn't really released it, so I kind of found it and started using it. And I should have contacted him much earlier in my development, because I ended up making some changes to make some things work for me. Um, but I didn't end up doing it until, I don't know, maybe the end of the year, early this year. Actually, telling him, he was very surprised that someone was actually had released, a product that was using it. Um, so I'm now working with him a little bit more closely, and I'll be rolling in some of the changes that he's made to that backend, sort of the backend that handles the actual network audio um, part of this thing, um, and some improvements to the. There is a server involved, but it's not passing any audio. So in SonoBus, it's called the connection server. Um, but it's the thing. It's basically it does sit out on a server, an AWS server, and it's the thing that keeps track of the groups. So you put in a group, everyone puts in the same group name, then they can connect to each other. It's the thing that keeps track of who is currently trying to be in a group, and then what
Mhm.
their IP addresses are, so they can tell all the other peers what the addresses are. So then they can communicate directly with each other. So no audio is passing through that server. It's just matchmaking.
So how close are you from releasing that update?
I mean, I guess I didn't really say what the update was, but there are some other things that could help with possibly some of the latency. We might be able to get a bit of a lower latency, at least I hope. Um, there's some jitter buffer redesign things in this newer version. I can't give you a date on that, but that's sort of the next thing on my list, is to sort of get back to that and get up to the latest version of AOO in SonoBus. But there's a lot of other features. Um, I get a lot of requests from users, things they want. It's actually interesting because when I first did it, I kind of went with the model where people can just, there's no user accounts, there's no, making profiles, there's nothing on, effectively, there's no server that's
Mhm.
keeping everyone's data. which is good and bad. It's it's good in that it makes it really easy because it's an open source project. I didn't want to have any heavy duty responsibilities for back end, paying for server time to handle all this stuff. And I wanted to make it really easy for people to make their own connection servers, and if they wanted complete privacy, they can do that. You just pick a group name and
Password.
connect, and optionally a password, sure.
Yeah.
And so the private groups was how the thing started. So it wasn't really designed to be a community. And so then I released it, that way, just as private groups was the only thing. It was interesting. The Facebook user group, and there's like a Discord server for SonoBus. So we got a lot of feedback from people who they just wanted to connect with, random people like they are used to in Jamulus. They can kind of see what servers are available and how many people are on there, and kind of jump on there. And I guess Jamkazam is similar. And they wanted the same kind of thing to happen on SonoBus. So I just quickly implemented the public server feature, which is really just a public group. I'm sorry, public group, which is a regular group that the server keeps a list of and exposes to people, and they can just jump on. And that's been interesting because seeing the dynamics of a public group system like that. People don't generally like to start public groups, so they'll usually be maybe one or two on there, and people will tend to jump on those, and they won't be named very well because ideally people would name these groups, and say like where they're located, sort of geographic centered or something, because latency is pretty important if people want to jam together. And so usually you want to jump on a group that is close to you, but it's actually been interesting that people haven't done that. And so there's all sorts of international sort of jam sessions going on,
which are quite random in that sense that people just join spontaneously and they don't even know who exactly they are playing with.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things they're going into this, public groups. That's what they want to do. But, and so they've, there's certain things that you do when you're playing with big latency that you just kind of have to, the limitations that you just get used to. And there's some things that we've tried to put in here to sort of mitigate that. Some sort of monitoring delay features that I've put in, so that if you're playing so in the Jamulus model, when you're jamming with someone, they want you to play and monitor yourself through the server, so with latency, which is up to a point is possible, but it takes a lot of getting used to, depending on what instrument you play, to hear yourself late. So it basically makes your brain play earlier, so that it gets out to everyone, and so everyone sort of hears what you're playing at the same time, and it does actually work to keep people in sync, which is interesting. So I've put in a feature, even though there's no server, it's sort of pretending like you're listening to yourself through a server just by adding delay to your monitoring. So that's
do you want to bring up the interface of SonoBus? Do you have it on your machine? Right?
Yeah, I can bring that up.
Just in case if we want to illustrate any of the points of our discussion visually as well. I will add it to the stream in a moment. Okay, so here we go. For anyone who hasn't seen SonoBus's interface before, that's what you will see when you download and install the application.
Right. So I'm just connected to myself over here, another computer, actually the same computer. Yeah, the thing about this is it works well for local networks too. So if you have several machines on your local network, you can run SonoBus and actually get, the lowest latency performance you'll get ever with SonoBus will be on your local network, wired, Ethernet. And that's the other thing. Obviously, wired Ethernet is recommended for everybody, everywhere, who wants to use this kind of thing.
But it's not always as easily done, obviously.
It's not always, especially nowadays, people are like, wires. They don't have an Ethernet cable in their house. There's all sorts of, but people who are doing this kind of stuff, they've learned over the last year at least that it makes such a huge difference that they've bought the cables and gotten if maybe they're not close to the router, but they maybe had to get a 50, 100-foot cable to make it happen. I don't know, but it's worth it. Um, and for the mobile platforms, even less people, know that you can actually do, you can do wired Ethernet on iOS and Android using just like a USB Ethernet adapter like this,
Yeah.
with like the right connector, the camera connection kit or whatever, the Lightning to USB converter for iOS, and the OTG USB dongle thingies for Android, and I use a USB hub, and you can put this in. You can put your audio interface in as well, and you can do the whole thing on Android or iOS wired, and it works. So that's something to look into if you wanted to do that.
I
But
think my experience of playing with other musicians live publicly is that most people just take it for granted that the Wi-Fi is the main way of consuming internet, and they are very mm, unaware of the benefits of using the Ethernet as a replacement for those networked music performances, as a net replacement connection. And I feel like there is a lot more education required to make musicians aware of the benefits, unless of course they will end up learning the hard way by, or maybe being frustrated by low quality performance of the Wi-Fi networks. But yeah, it's definitely something that I feel requires more reminders. So I'm glad you brought it up, and especially that you also mentioned that it is possible to connect portable devices like iPads or iPhones to Ethernet. That's even less likely scenario, I feel, with many musicians, but possibly because people are just not aware that those dongles even exist. So
right, yeah, yeah.
mm,
Um, but yeah, it's one of those things where if someone is on Wi-Fi, you'll know it and they'll know it because sort of the automatic jitter buffer thing will crank itself up to like 40, 50, 100 milliseconds because of just the random dropping. Dude, I mean, you can just hear in my office when I turn on Wi-Fi, um, on my computer, and then so I'm just using Wi-Fi, and then just one machine's using Wi-Fi might be okay, but then I like lift up my phone, and it starts to do something, and it totally just you know it causes all sorts of dropouts because you can't trust Wi-Fi. It's just not it's designed to deal with you know this multipath stuff. This things that happen normally you don't notice, but with low latency UDP, um, when the packets drop or when they aren't delivered in time, you'll hear the dropout if you're like really if your jitter buffer is as low as it can be, um, it's just because you're looking for low latency jamming. So y- generally avoid Wi-Fi at all costs. That's the that's the rule.
what I would
Uh,
also be kind of anxious about is that many people might just simply get discouraged, and they would think, oh, this is just not working, it's not worth my effort, and they will uh, get that idea that it's impossible to use those collaborative technologies effectively. And I
right.
think, yeah, that's why the education about how to set it up correctly is so important. So I'm glad we are discussing this now.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fairly well covered on most of the documentation and the readmes on pretty much all the stuff, because it's just such an important thing. But maybe people don't notice it anyway. I don't know.
My experience of working with other musicians is that often there is one or two people driving a group performance and encouraging other group members to adopt collaborative software like SonoBus, for example. but people who adopt it just for the sake of, say, a specific performance, they would just simply download the application and try to make it work on the spot without putting that much time into studying documentation, for example. And that's when problems can happen, when you have uh, a few project members who are a lot less experienced with using that kind of software.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but so what one person, actually Rebecca, who I was interviewing in May for this broadcast, she's actually using your application in teaching networked music performance. And I got a question from her because she couldn't join us today due to the time difference. She's in Europe, and I think it's in the middle of the night right now. So she was wondering whether there would be any developments in SonoBus that will allow to overcome some institutional network restrictions. So in the university sector, you might have restrictions on peer-to-peer applications and firewall restrictions and other network protections. So can you think of any developments that might help in those
Yeah.
circumstances?
Yeah. So that's a good point to bring up. I mean, the reason these institutional networks, educational, colleges, universities, businesses, they tend to have routers that are more restrictive. So there are different forms of NAT. It's like NAT, network address translation. And so when you're doing a pure peer-to-peer thing like SonoBus, um, there's only certain kinds of NAT that works. And effectively, the kind that doesn't work is called, people call it symmetric NAT. And it's basically like um, the address that it presents to other computers, the port numbers are different for every other computer. So the way the SonoBus normally works is it connects to the connection server. You know, it sees what the address and port is of that peer and another peer, and then it tells the other peers what they are, and they try to connect to each other directly. Um, but with symmetric NAT, those port numbers won't work because if it was the server talking back to that original peer, it would work. But when another peer talks to that peer, it's actually a different port number that the router allocates for that path, and so it doesn't actually let it route the port. So there are tricks. Um, there are tricks can be done for the other kinds of NAT that happens, and so SonoBus uses hole punching to deal with that. To basically let them talk to, because they know what the ports are on both sides, and so they do this little thing where they talk to each other at the same time, and then the routers let them through and let them talk, and that's how regular peer-to-peer works. With symmetric nets, um, the normal way to get around them is to have a server that's out on the public internet that is effectively relaying all the data
Hmm. Yeah.
between the peers. So when you have a server-based system like Jamulus, you don't have to worry about it because it's already a public server. Everybody's talking to that only. So there's no problem with this. It's only a problem in this peer-to-peer. Um, so there's a couple of solutions that SonoBus might take in the future for this. One is to um, actually make the SonoBus connection server um, able to do that relaying.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm. That's
and so it
exactly
would,
what. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Now I would not make my public
Statement.
SonoBus.net a relaying server,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
people could set up their own because that part is also open source. So I'd make it easier for people to build that on their own servers if they wanted to make and turn on the relaying feature, um, and then and then it would work. And that feature is actually in one of the things that's in this newer version of AOO that I want to roll in. So once I do
Right.
that, it'll be fairly simple to let that be a switch in the connection server if people want to do that. um, And there's another idea I had, which is which is actually letting, instead of there being a central server that would be relaying everything, because that would still be a lot of data, because you'd still be sending everything to everybody. It'd still be peer to peer. It's just some of the data would be going through the server, and it's the same amount of bandwidth though. Um, Another option is to make it more like the Jamulus model, where there's the server's doing the mixing, and so you're basically sending your input to someone, um, and then that other someone that you're sending to handles all of the mixing from everyone else in the group, and it sends you back the final, the final mix. So you're basically just sending, say you're sending stereo, receiving stereo, but it's got everyone, it's got the whole mix of everyone in it. Um, but that mix was actually happening on someone else's device, someone who has, really good internet perhaps, and has the bandwidth to sort of bridge for people. Um, Maybe someone who's more centrally located could be that person. So not necessarily a server, but it's sort of acting like a server, just another peer. Um, and they could actually still, like, I would actually present the same user interface. So with someone else connected here, I'll connect another. Let's see. I'm going to load up another one to connect to the same group. Let's see. So here's a second person that comes in. So now the group has 3 people in it.
Yeah.
Um, you can control the levels that you're hearing of all the people coming in. Oh, here. So this is right now. Nothing is happening, but you'd see meters if I was actually
So
sending anything.
for someone who has not used SonoBus before, could you explain whether those level controls are public or private?
Yeah. So everything you see on the interface is it's just what you're hearing. It's
So in that
just, these
sense,
are the other people.
mhm.
Yeah.
So it's just your private mix, basically.
Yeah. Everything's a private mix.
Yeah.
You're getting what everyone else is sending individually, and by default, everything will be panned, you know, left, right, or centered. The level by default will be at unity. You can change the default level if you want. Some of these public groups, especially if you do people come in, maybe you want them to start out as quieter, and then if you see that they're not making crazy loud noises, you can turn them up, and some people appreciate that. But yeah, so this is all just local mix, um, local panning. You can actually put effects on other people.
That's very unique. I always found it such a amazing additional bonus feature of Sonobus that you actually have built-in effects. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, just
Yeah,
basic noise gate, compression, EQ,
yeah, nice.
and this is in the
Reverb.
recent version. Yeah, reverb.
Wow.
I changed this in the recent version a little bit. So now by default, you have to turn their reverb send up, and this is the sort of the main reverb. You have to turn that on. Um, I may change this back to the way it used to be a little bit, but so there's 2 reverbs. This is just reverb for people. If for some reason they don't have effects on their end, they're sending you a completely dry signal, and you want to give them a little reverb. This is where you do it, and it's just for you. Um, and
And
in the sort of the most recent version, I added the ability for you to add reverb to your own signal before it goes out to other people. So if you don't have a setup where you've already got your effects, a lot of people will have, you know, they'll be running this from a DAW plugin, and they'll have their whole stack of effects, and they're already sending the full stuff, including reverb. But some people don't have that complicated of a setup. So this input mixer here, you can actually, if you have a multi-channel setup locally, you can add. So I'll just remove this. So it kind of starts out like this. So this is, just make it clear. This is the input mixer. You can pick what the inputs are. Right now, this audio interface only has 2 inputs, so there's no choices. But if you had a multi-channel interface, you could pick which of your 2 inputs you wanted. of your interface that you've activated here in the audio options. Um, and then you can do some input effects. So the stuff in here, the effects in the input mixer are all before the signal goes out. So I've added, a noise gate, compression, and then you can actually, this is where the input reverb send is. If you turn this up, then you can add reverb to your signal going out, and you control that reverb here.
What's your opinion on how it will impact any additional latency added to your signal? Would you say that it's purely dependent on the processing power of one's computer, or are there any kind of considerations in terms of adding those effects to your input signal?
No, these particular effects don't have any added latency. It's not a look-ahead compressor or gate. These are basic effects that don't have added latency.
Mhm.
They don't take that much CPU actually either. So in most cases, it shouldn't affect anything
Right.
nowadays. Um,
And
yeah,
another, sorry, go ahead. Go on,
I was gonna
please.
say the most important things regarding latency are actually in the audio setup. So this is the standalone version. So you can see
Mhm.
you can control which interface you're connected to, the sample rate, audio buffer size. So the audio buffer size is important for latency. For most people um, on a Mac or Windows with the right driver, you want to probably 128 samples is a good starting point. If you can go lower, great. Um, and But that's on Mac. It's generally easier. It's there's no choices for audio drivers. It's just what Core Audio what Mac has, which is generally good. On Windows, I recommend ASIO drivers. If you have an actual audio interface, usually you'll have an ASIO driver for it. If you don't, you can get ASIO for all, which does usually help over the Windows Audio drivers. All this stuff is is not fun to talk about, but it is
But
important.
but most people doing any kind of recording projects would probably already understand the importance of drivers. So that
Those people
hopefully,
would, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Which isn't this isn't necessarily all the people who would use SonoBus. So that's where it gets tricky. This like the people
And
the new people you were talking about.
and in terms of, I guess where I see potential problems emerging is how do you deal with any driver or latency issues in the Android domain, because you don't have the ASIO for all driver like
Yeah,
you do on Windows. So
I
is
mean
there
that's
anything?
Android has gotten a little better with regard to that in the last couple of years on the newer devices. Um, and so the Juice sort of wraps those different driver options. It's supposed to be picking the best one, and you can kind of set the buffer size in the settings as well there. And it really varies depending on the device. Some devices can actually be quite good, approaching iOS level of stability at low latency, but others not at all.
So I guess you have to
Yeah,
just know which specific Android device to buy in the first place if you want to get
pretty
the best
much.
performance. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
And Jesse, just because you're showing us the interface, and there's quite a lot of settings that a user can configure for themselves or for the group. One person asked me a question about saving those privately chosen settings.
yeah.
So that's another future viewer who couldn't attend today live. So what would you say to the standalone? Because I guess when you use it as a plugin, it saves all the settings automatically. But for
Right.
standalone version,
Yeah, the standalone version, there's a menu. There's some menus. They're not showing on this screen share, but um, on the Mac version. But yeah, there's a file menu, and in there is there's a load and save setup
okay, yeah.
choices, and so that'll include all the stuff in the input mixer. And there's some presets too, so you can do some like load recent setups thing. So um, you can kind of quickly get if you have just a variety of different setups you use with different input devices. um, I keep clicking on the the window in the view. Okay. Um, and yeah, so what it saves is all the stuff in the inputs mixer. And when you're connected to a group, the changes you make with their levels or pans um, and jitter buffer options, they do get saved by the user name. So, um, but now that I think about it, I think that the setups, the loading and save setups that I was talking about may not actually save the information for the
For your
users.
participants,
No,
right?
no, actually, I think it does.
Okay.
I'll have to check that. It should if it doesn't. Um, yeah. So if you connect later with a person with the same name, it should restore the volume, panning, other options that you were previously using with them,
Yeah, yeah.
um,
And
including the monitoring routing for them.
do you
Um,
think audio properties, they will be global, so they will be always saved, like your buffer size and resolution of your audio?
that's part of those settings as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. When you're running the standalone version, the plugin version doesn't have control of any of this stuff. So this
Yeah,
isn't even this option page is not even available in the plugin because
yeah.
the host handles all that. Um, yeah, so I'll talk for a second about the different options you have for send quality. So
Hmm. Yeah,
one of the things I wanted was to be able to send uncompressed. So for instance, Jack Trip um, exclusively uses uncompressed audio, and that's one of its features. Is that it's usually you're sending 16-bit, you can send 24-bit, but it's effectively just sending uncompressed, uses a bunch of bandwidth, um, but uh, is is worth it. If you have the bandwidth, you might as well use it. And the same thing is available in SonoBus here. Um,
yeah.
so
Which
in
is
the send
mm,
quality, you can
amazing.
choose your default send quality in the options, but if you want to individually, so if some people may have not so good internet connections, you may want to stick with the compressed options for them. Here's a tip: never, never choose one below 96 kilobits per second per channel. Um, just I have them in there, just because. But in general, when you choose those lower, the lowest bandwidth ones, the latency will actually go higher because the minimum block size for the packets that the compression sort of needs to get quality that sounds even halfway decent is bigger. So the latency will get a little bigger as you choose options below
Wow,
96.
that's a good
Um,
tip.
that's a just a yeah. I was thinking about putting in a little,
Exclamation mark.
not recommended on the ones that are lower. Um, and so these anywhere from 96 to 256 kilobits per second per channel. So that's per channel. If you're sending stereo, it's and you've chosen 96, you're effectively sending 192 kilobits per second of a stream. So that's if you're used to thinking about you know MP3s or AACs. Um, it uses Opus compression, which is what most of these are things that use. I think Zoom uses it. Jamkazam uses it. Jamulus uses it. Um, they're all using the same because it has the best low latency um, compressed audio uh, support, and that's why they use it. And actually, sound quality is quite good. I have a hard time telling the difference between depending on the source, but anywhere between 96 and 256. Um, it's all really pretty good. But if you want to go uncompressed, you choose these PCM options here at the bottom.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
PCM 16-bit is effectively like CD quality.
Hmm.
If you're running at 48 kilohertz, it's a little bit more than CD quality, um, which I recommend running at 48,000 sample rate. Because if you're using the Opus compressed options, that's its native format. That's actually the only sample rate it supports. So I'll be SonoBus will effectively resample you to 48K if you're using something else when you're
That's
using the
interesting.
compression.
So you would actually not save yourself any bandwidth by going to a lower sample rate. That's interesting as well.
Nope,
Mm,
nope. Unless you're using uncompressed. in which case it doesn't resample then. But still. So yeah, so another thing about the uncompressed, which is important, is that there's a little added latency with the compressed formats. Um, you know, like I mentioned, 96 through 256 are the ones you want to use. With that, I'm using the lowest possible added latency options for the Opus, but it's still 2.5 milliseconds added in each direction. So
Right.
if over and above whatever the block size is, the other things that affect latency, which is the block size and the jitter buffer and all that. So it will be the lower latency if you're using uncompressed, which is the PCM. So if you're in a smaller group, or and you all have good internet, generally go for PCM if you can, because that'll be your best chance of getting the lowest latency.
And I know that we've been primarily kind of bringing up the context of musicians jamming in real time with SonoBus, but I am equally aware of many musicians actually using your app primarily for studio-based exchange of audio signals, and
Yeah.
they just put it as a plugin in their DAW and stream audio between various members of the music group, and that's been. I'm not sure about the numbers. I don't know if you know those numbers, but in my opinion, it's a very big user group of SonoBus who don't even want to jam, but they just want to use it for studio-based collaboration.
Yeah, and that was another reason I wanted to that was one of one of the features I wanted to be able to do, and that's obviously important, but I have a plugin version implementation to make it as easy as possible for people to just like insert it in their DAWs. So yeah, I added the multi-channel support, earlier this year. So I just changed the sending. So this, you see here now, this person is sending 16 channels, so I can expand that. I can see,
Wow.
there's no signal. I'm not sending any actually stuff, but you'd see the meters active for all the 16 channels if they were sending anything. You can actually name them. So on this end, I can change the layout into like groups. So let's see. I can add, multiple groups of stereo groups. So I'm just adding 3 different stereo groups. Say, so you can bass with 3 S's.
Oh, that sounds more bassy.
Yeah.
Wow, that's such a powerful app. So many features. It's really amazing how much you have included in terms of functionality here. I think, it will be hard to find anything just as fully featured as SonoBus. There's just so much you can do with it, and you can even record locally within the app as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can just hit
Mm.
record, the record button at the bottom, and
Mm.
there's some different options. You can record everyone in the group, can have their own independent channel. So up in here, up in here, in the options recording. So you can pick the format, the bits. So you can pick FLAC, WAV, or OGG. And here's where you can record the full mix into a file. You record yourself into a separate file, and each connected user will get their own file or files. Now, if they're sending multi-channel groups, now these should all be their own files.
Yeah. Wow. And are you aware of any impact of the recording on the performance of the app or latency, or it shouldn't really?
It shouldn't affect it. No, it shouldn't. I haven't gotten any feedback that has been any problems.
Mhm.
You know, I, I haven't totally. I haven't done any crazy testing where I'm trying to, record 128 tracks at once. I maybe then there'll be a problem. I don't know. Most people's use they're not going to hit that kind of limitation
Mhm. Oh,
with the
that's
built-in
great.
recording. And you can also play back. So yeah, if I was recording something, and then so right now I'm recording the mix and everything, and if I finish the recording, and here it is. It shows up. Just
Mhm.
and then you can
add it to your jam potentially.
yeah, you can send this playback to everyone else in the group. This little button here, if that's on, then when you're playing back something here, you can loop it. Um,
Yeah.
everyone else will hear it, and then
I
you can
guess
record again, and sort of like you can build up a basic, overdubbing loop thing if you wanted to, but it's kind of not very useful.
for a standalone version, could you add a pre-recorded loop, for example? Like a
Yeah,
percussive loop, you could as well just import audio into
yeah.
SonoBus? Yeah.
Just open this. This
Okay.
is like the open. It just opens up a local file browser, and you can pick whatever file you want to play.
Wow. So
Um,
powerful and so self-contained as well.
yeah, and you can also do this through the plugin version as well. So like when you have it as a plugin, it has a multi-bus support for hosts that can deal with it. So more sort of flexible hosts like Reaper or Ableton are able to you can route multiple stuff in. So you can have the input mixer, you know, have multiple tracks of things coming from these aux inputs, which you can't see here, but and that can include playback from the DAW or whatever, and it can be sent separately in the multi-channel through to other people that way. So yeah, it could kind of do a little bit of everything, and that was the
Yeah.
goal. But the idea was also to make it so regular users could use it. I know I have a tendency to make things that get a little complicated. There are a lot of controls here. You don't have to use them all.
Yeah.
In fact, you can actually click this little button here, and if you even don't want to see any of this, status information, it'll
Mhm.
just show you your basic mute, solo, and level stuff. Um,
Yeah, it must be
so-
a bit of a interesting dilemma for a developer. Those decisions, what to include for the sake of expanding the possibilities versus overwhelming users with the options and maybe being scared by a very busy interface.
yeah, I tend toward the overwhelming users, but I think I like to think of it as you know making them learn some things. I don't know. I feel like they shouldn't you shouldn't underestimate your users because there's a whole bunch of people that will appreciate the features that are there, and then the ones who don't quite understand it or who might be put off by all the extra stuff, they'll eventually get used to it, and then they'll realize, oh wow, this is actually kind of cool information, and then so they'll sort of grow to understand what it's trying to show them. I feel like that's better than just dumbing it all down and making it so it's there are no controls and it's we're doing everything for you perfectly. And you know, I didn't have the I didn't think that I'd be able to do everything for everyone perfectly. So I put all the controls in so I could blame it on them.
But you definitely built an amazing app, and we just got a comment that people, yeah, on YouTube, I think that people love those features and keep them coming. So yeah, you have definitely a very unique product, and I feel like it's so generous of you to make it an open source and free product. So thank you, Jesse, for doing this for the community of music makers around the world.
Sure, yeah. I mean, the reason you know kind of started out in the open source world, which was that was my thing for a while, and then I once I was making the apps, so I've been in the commercial world doing that stuff, and then it's just been a long time since I'd gone back to the open source world. So I figured this was a good place to do it because this is sort of I was testing. I was this kind of came out. It was kind of experimental. I didn't want to have to you know when you have something that people are paying for, they expect certain things from support. Now I'm generally pretty good at support, even though people aren't paying me for it. It's just the way it works out. But like I don't feel too if people were really complaining about it because it wasn't working and they they'd paid whatever for it, I would it's a lot more responsibility. So
Yeah.
that, I mean, one of the reasons I made it open source was so I wouldn't have to be so guilty when I couldn't support it well or if something didn't work. It's kind of an interesting way to go about things, but um,
And are you the only person developing SonoBus, or is there anyone helping you with the development?
I'm the main developer. There's been a few other people that have helped. Mostly just pointing out bugs, feedback, feature requests, kind of things. It's one of those things. I do have a couple other open source software, and um, yeah, you'd think that people would just jump on and start submitting requests, but for audio apps specifically, it's such of a niche area. There's not that there's not a whole lot of people that can just jump into one of these things and start fixing things and just really joining in. So I mean, if someone were to approach me and say, "Hey, I've got these ideas and I'm going to implement them," then
Mhm.
I fully support that. But it generally doesn't turn out that way
Yeah.
in practice, which is it doesn't bother me. But yeah, I mean, other than like I said, the developer of AOO, who has obviously been working on their part of it, and I'll be integrating it. There's some other people helping with some of the distribution, so the Linux package building. I've gotten some good help from people with that, um, and yeah, I've gotten just some small fixes here and there from people who can just kind of peek their head in and say, "Oh, I think this might be the problem." But yeah, primarily it's just me.
Well, obviously, you are the perfect person for this task. Being a musician and a developer, you understand the technical and creative side really well. So that's a great skill
Yeah,
set.
it's been interesting. So that when I added the public groups, I would periodically jump on into one of these public groups, and so there's a community building there, which is it's been very positive. Like they seem to be happy happy to be there, and there's kind of an interesting mix of musicians from different countries, and I've sort of gotten to know a lot of them just by jumping on and jamming with them. So I would have like a wind controller. I've got this is actually pretty cool. It's called the Warble. It's actually like a penny whistle sort of format. So it has, finger holes like this and um but it's actually a really good MIDI wind controller,
Wow.
especially for people like me who are the whistle fingering is sort of my most familiar fingering of all the wind instruments. So it was good for me. And I work with actually the developer of this product on the firmware to sort of make it handle some of the MPE related things to make it work better with the continuum or other sense they can appreciate it. So
Oh,
yeah, I've
wow.
been jumping on playing like sax, using audio modeling SWAM sax or trumpet with this wind controller. But
So
I
it's
also
like a hardware version of ThumbJam.
right, right, yeah. Um, and yeah, I usually do that because latency wise, it's not as critical.
Mhm.
Playing a sort of a melodic thing rather than the bass. I've played bass with some people who are more local, um, but yeah, it's a challenge to do rhythm stuff when the latency is higher. And so I do have a reason to in the future go in and see if I can get the latency a little lower. Some people have better luck than others um, with it, but I think there are some things to look at to improve the low latency performance. Um, when I get back to it, obviously I do other work. I've got my other apps to maintain and you know make the Android version as fully featured as the iOS version. This is the tuner app I'm talking about. Um, so I hope to get back to SonoBus soon, but I can't guarantee it. Um, when I'll get back to adding new features, but um,
So speaking of the future and your existing range of apps. Do you see yourself, and also knowing how successful SonoBus is within the community, do you see yourself adding any collaborative features to your existing apps? For example, ThumbJam or DrumJam. Do you think it might be useful?
Yeah. So I wasn't thinking about adding it to those particular apps. I sort of had it in the back of my mind about how um, it could be used for the more of the TonalEnergy Tuner market. So the sort of the student education market. Um, I know having a daughter that was doing virtual band this last school year, it's definitely a challenging situation for educators. It was. Hopefully that'll be the better this coming year. They'll be back in school in person. But um, yeah, so that was one of the ideas I had at the beginning was, okay, how can I make it so people can sort of practice together um, more easily? And so yeah, I was thinking that that was probably where I would sort of spin some of the Sonobus stuff in, and maybe
Mhm.
not exactly like this. There's some other ways that might be interesting to do that don't have the latency issues. Sort of like the old chaining technique, where one person is sending to the next person, who's sending to the next person. So there's no latency, but you can only hear the people who are before you
Right. Yeah.
in the chain. But you're still, if you're playing the same piece, um, it can work. Uh, so there's some different sort of audio networking, sort of audio routing architectures that I was thinking about integrating into Sonobus. So you could do these things where, because the other thing to note, and this is important with a peer-to-peer thing like Sonobus, is the group size is generally limited. So you can get up to maybe 8 or 10 people in one group before you're going to start running into issues with bandwidth, primarily, possibly CPU issues as well, but um, usually bandwidth. Because of that, large groups such as school bands, choral groups, they're better served using some of the ones that are server based to do their things. But with some of these ideas with different kind of routing, you could have sort of sections could be in a group, and then they feed into sort of a more of a group that is all of the sections, and then kind of a tree like structure. There's some ideas related to that might be interesting to make possible in Sonobus. So this idea of bridging two groups together is something that will probably add in the
Wow.
future, or multiple groups, and that kind of goes along hand in hand with the having one of the peers mix, the other people's audio and send them a just the mix thing. So sort of the combination of all these features can make it kind of like a jack of all trades. I'd like to eventually have time to work on those features. I don't know when it's going to happen, but
It sounds like such a brilliant solution to the problem, that kind of merging of multiple groups. Yeah, so sounds like you have, well, you obviously are aware of so many avenues for development. So it's probably just a matter of you finding time to implement all of those ideas. But sounds like there's just so much more that can be done. And it's such a great time to be a collaborative musician at the moment.
yeah, and I think it's interesting. People are they're actually starting to play together in person again. Um, but having used these things, they're realizing, wow, I don't have to carry my stuff.
Mm.
I don't have to drive 20 miles to and it actually, it's not as good as in person, but it's it still works. Like I think people will actually keep using these things, um,
Yeah. Well,
even when
yeah,
they don't have to. Yeah.
I've heard similar comments on various forums that some people, after being locked down and using collaborative software, they had to go back to face rehearsal. It was such a chore to drive for 40 minutes, then unpack the gear and then set up. And uh, have all the issues with technology in the actual room and then pack up and drive back home. So I think there is that element of convenience, but there's so many other benefits of collaboration. For example, meeting brand new musicians that you could expect to meet through those
Right.
SonoBus social media channels, like you've mentioned the Discord and the Facebook group. Is there any other community apart from those two that you can think of for SonoBus
I mean,
users?
there's an email list, like a Google group. It's mostly just support questions there. Um, those are the two main ones. Um, there are some new public group features that people have requested. So right now, there's really nothing. There's no options in there. You can't change the name after you've joined it. You can't switch a public group to private. You can't like kick people out of a group or control. So people have requested some more functionality for the public group features, which I will add as well, to let there be like a group leader sort of role that could actually mute people, change the name, switch it to a private group. So that's one of the things people have wanted, is to be able to maybe start in a public group and sort of collect some people, and then once they have a little a group that they like, they can kind of hop off and just convert that to a private group so that no one can join it anymore. Um, so I'll probably do that. Um, so in terms of community, some of those features will make the community aspects in the app work a little better.
Okay.
Um, and what I was saying at the very beginning earlier was that people tend to not want to make new public groups. They just want to join one that's already there that
Right.
has more than one person in it.
Less
um,
daunting, perhaps. You don't have to be responsible
right,
for what happens.
right. So, but if we can figure out ways to make people more likely to create their own new group, I don't know how to solve that one, but um, that would be good, I think. Um,
Mm, I guess one perhaps too complicated solution is to add some kind of public uh, chat room within SonoBus, but
mhm.
that might be perhaps too much in terms of server hosting responsibility on your
Right, it would
behalf.
be a little more. I mean, I don't know how much. It might not be too bad. I actually have considered that. I did add chat, text chat within the group. So once you're in a group, you can do a text chat back and forth here if you click this guy here.
Oh,
You know.
great! Yeah. Because I have used an application called Om Studio, which is for studio-based remote music collaboration, and you could always see who is actually online live in real time, so you could easily
Hmm.
engage new people.
And there are ones like that, like SoundJack, kind of
Mm,
has that model. I specifically didn't want that. Like I didn't. I came in from the sort of private group privacy thing. People who already knew each other would sort of communicate on their own, and then join the same group. They could send a link to each other or whatever. But yeah, I didn't want to have the whole
Management of
account.
community, yeah, because then you
Yeah,
have to create an account and someone has to manage, or software has to be created to manage those profiles.
right.
So it's a lot more work, I would imagine.
I mean, that's why I didn't do it. But then,
Mm,
so coming in from that model and trying to figure out how are ways to make the community part still work without having user accounts. But yeah, that having a public sort of chat uh, waiting room kind of a thing, that's a possible good solution that it's more likely to happen.
right. Okay. But yeah, well, as you demonstrated today, there's just so much already in there. It's mind blowing how powerful your app is already. So it's a great product and has so many applications, because jamming obviously is just one of them, but then exchanging musical ideas for songwriting is another, studio recording sessions are yet another
Yeah,
application of
and
SonoBus.
podcasting maybe too. I know
Mm.
there's a lot of solutions for that, but it's another one. I don't know. Um,
Absolutely, yeah. You could easily connect with your interviewee and even multiple interviewees at once. Perhaps what people could implement on top of Sonobus in those circumstances is some kind of video link as well, but that could be a third-party app quite easily.
yeah, I want to keep it audio focused. People have asked, "What about video?" I'm like, "There's lots of other video things.
Mm,
Use that." So yeah, I mean, but actually, like using something like Jitsi or
mm.
what is the other one?
Well, Jitsi is
OBS
open,
Ninja.
right? Yeah, and
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
I may actually integrate because they make it fairly easy to just like create a link and you know and
Okay,
and just I could pop one of these links out using the same group name and people could click on that and it would open up their browser and for Jitsi or OBS Ninja, and that's if there's any kind of integration with video, I would probably do it that way. Just like you know, it's sort of another video platform that's already doing the web-based WebRTC stuff. Um, when you're doing that, obviously that's taking up some of your network bandwidth and
yeah,
more traffic is happening. Some people have had no problems running that at the same time as SonoBus, but it really depends on your network. Um, so that's something to keep in mind. If you really care about the audio the most, then you just won't do the video.
yeah,
Um, but
yeah.
but yeah,
Although, yeah, it's an interesting dilemma because musicians obviously are quite used to responding to not only musical but also visual cues. So I can see how that could be useful even beyond the world of podcasting. Just seeing how your band, how the body language of your fellow musicians is making you to do certain things. So,
right.
but yeah, definitely there is that flip side of compromising your or giving up a certain portion of your bandwidth for the video part, which, as we know, tends to consume more data than audio.
I mean, it
So
can if you want to. You can turn on uncompressed and send 64 channels. You can use way more bandwidth than Sonomos if you want to.
yeah,
I've tested that. Yeah, I got like a gigabit connection here, so I actually just tested to see what I could push out. So yeah, I was at one point I was pushing out like 50 or 70 megabits per second, just audio.
wow,
It was working. It was pretty great. Yeah, it's I don't know if I recommend it, but it'll do it. Yeah, the other thing about the video is that it's this the synchronization.
yeah,
The video is always going to be a little more delayed if you're especially if you're setting up with a low latency audio. So
which
y-
would go against this whole notion of using your visual cues, because your visual cue will be so out of sync with your audio
right.
that yeah, it would
I mean, yeah,
be maybe
you
even more
couldn't be a
confusing.
conductor. You couldn't use it for that, but unless it was just one directional. So that's the other thing about my little ideas about having the chain. It's not my idea. It's just an old idea, but um, so the visual conductor part would be in the front, the first in the chain, and or including a metronome or a guide track or something, and then everyone else would be playing based on that. And so then it would work. Um, yeah, it's just one of those situations where there's some there's some solutions to it. Um,
Yeah, the video is definitely an interesting part of the discussion because I feel it brings people closer together. But I guess you probably know that very well, that many people using Sonobus are probably just using only the audio part without any visual feedback.
oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I prefer that. I don't know, I don't need to see people playing to play with them. So
It
just
probably
audio works for me.
probably makes it less intimidating, but also makes impacts in a interesting way on the performance, because you are focused 100% on what you are hearing, rather than getting distracted by looking at the screen at the same time as playing. So there are
Right.
pros and cons. Wow, so we have covered quite a lot of ground in terms of looking at what Sonobus can offer to musicians. So that has been a great overview of how much is included in the app. So I'm just thinking that it's probably a good time to think of some concluding remarks for today. And Jesse, you've mentioned a lot of things about the present state of the software, and also a lot of ideas about what could be included in the future versions of SonoBus. Is there anything else you are working on at the moment apart from SonoBus? Any other music apps or iOS perhaps, iOS music apps or anything on
Yeah, I
other
mean, like
platforms?
it's mainly the ones I mentioned before, the TonalEnergy Tuner, um, and that's the thing taking up my most of my time at the moment. Um, but there might be some other spin-offs of DrumJam, future versions of that that have some more features, including the audio unit plugin support. So it'll be a follow-on app. Um, Working with Pete Lockett on that. Um, yeah, I have a few like other little sort of effects. So I have like a reverse delay effect audio unit for iOS, which is also available already. But there might be some other smaller things that I pop out occasionally. I do have other ideas that I've had for a while, and it's just a matter of finding the time to work on them. So yeah, um, last year SonoBus sort of took over for a couple months of my life, um, and the other things got left behind. So now I'm like picking up on the stuff that I dropped on the floor before, and um, yeah, I mean I don't have any definite plans for new things, but anything could happen.
Yeah, so that's obviously already, there's so much that you have already created and it's available to musicians. So I just wanted to say, on behalf of the whole community, again, thank you for this generosity of creating this amazing product and making it open source. And even today's discussion was a great illustration how the open source functionality, how it can benefit the final product. So you mentioned how you have started by using somebody else's initial code that you have modified and developed further. And then even those discussions about potentially using another open source video application like Jitsi and using as part of SonoBus perhaps. So all those are amazing ways of utilizing that open source functionality, which is of a great benefit to the music makers, obviously, if
Yeah, it's
develop.
been fun. Yeah, it's definitely been a fun little project. I'm I'm glad that I did it just in terms of usually I do something so that I can play with it, and that's sort of like the thing I tell all new developers is work on something that you want to use. Just doing something as an exercise is never a good thing. So yeah, it's I've been lucky to pick things to work on that I actually also want to use. Um, it definitely helps keep things going.
Mm, yeah, well, we've been served very well by someone with your level of experience. So, uh, on that note, Jesse, thank you very much for your time today and for showing us all the ins and outs and a few little tricks about SonoBus, which sound really really useful. Those things about how to set it up. So thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure, and thank you for this amazing software.
No
uh,
problem.
Yeah, great. So thank you to anyone who was watching us live as well and contributing with the questions. The replay of our chat will be available through YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. So for anyone who couldn't join live, I hope you will enjoy our conversation as a replay. So thanks very much, everyone. That was our live stream for today.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.